All right, my friends. My name is Bishop Holsonback, and this is my YouTube channel and my Facebook group. And I want to welcome y'all to the show. You know, my friends, we got a very, very special guest tonight. Y'all know who Gary Wayne is. Gary Wayne, 80% of our videos are about Gary Wayne. I see y'all want to interact with Gary Wayne, and this is going to be y'all's chance to do so tonight. So please comment in the comment box. I'll take your comment, post it up on screen. Gary and I will read your comment and answer your questions live audio show. So thank you very much for tuning in tonight, my friends. All right, Gary, tonight I'd like to talk about Enochian mysticism and start everywhere you wanted to go with this, because you and I already talked about it. But lay forth the agenda of Nephilim culture for us.
Well, yeah, I mean, most people don't sort of think about the culture that is sort of accompanying our prehistory. And of course, it did have a culture, and the Nephilim and then the Rephaim had, very much a distinct culture and were the leaders of that culture. So it's important to understand what kind of society that the Nephilim and the Rephaim would have reigned over. And so if we look at that culture, let's start first with the sort of organizational structure of the of their civilizations. So you've got the Rephaim and the Nephilim. Rephaim I consider more as post-Diluvian giants, Nephilim more of the antediluvian giants, but they set up the same sort of organizational structure. So you have them usurping the kingships. So they're going to oversee all things in the government, all things in the army. They're going to lead the army. They're going to be warriors themselves. They're going to be the divine representatives of the fallen angels of the gods on the earth, and they're appointed in many of the traditions around the world in polytheism, whether it's at Nippur or elsewhere, where there's an anointing of the ring lord kings, which are the demigods. And they're going to be also a very large participant as the divine representative of the gods with the religious aspect. And that's religion of mysticism as we sort of understand it today. It has many, many forms, from Hinduism to Gnosticism. It's all essentially the same root religion. They just have different vernacular names today for the gods, and maybe some vernacular local slants to the rituals. But before the flood, when the religion was invented, it was invented by Enoch, son of Cain, who had inherited the knowledge, according to the Gnostics and the secret societies, the knowledge of Adam that Adam had learned in Eden, and decided to separate those into 7 disciplines, or the 7 sacred sciences, as they called it, or the 7 liberal arts, as we would know it today, and then developed this knowledge. And so as this knowledge was developing, Enoch, son of Cain, as opposed to Enoch, son of Jared, developed a mystical religion, one of degrees of initiation, of sun worship cult, and in honor of the pantheon. So not only was this religion sort of set up to lead people away from God, but to degrade God for, in terms of slandering him and not giving God credit for anything, as well as honoring their pantheon of the gods, which is the fallen angels that are talked about in the book of Enoch, and the angels that were sent to the prison, as they're talked about in Jude 1:6 and 2 Peter 2:4, and the spirits that Jesus is speaking to in 1 Peter 3. So you have this religion that is set up that's for the elite, that's for the bloodline class, and the whole nobility class that's taken over is going to control the priesthood with bloodlines in there as well. And in a lot of the Eastern religions, even to this day, you have a bloodline dominance within those religions at the top. And that goes right back to before the flood, and then again was restarted after the flood. So you have a sun worshiping, pantheon worshiping religion that is going to do everything according to what those gods would want them to do. And that's going to include human sacrifice. And it's going to include all sorts of rituals as well. And a lot of these rituals will seem a little bit similar to what the Israelites did. But of course, it's a counterfeit ritual, and it's not done in the same spirit, and it's not done to the same God. It's done to the pantheon of gods, the seven wandering stars as they're typically sort of depicted, although there's probably a little bit more complex organizational structure to it than that. So you would have this whole society that is set up and organized around Enochian mysticism. And this becomes their culture. They're doing everything in service for that pantheon. And everything that they're doing is to be designed to be a counterfeit and usurped over what God had planned, and to honor them instead of God. And so once you start this rebellious culture with this rebellious counterfeit religion and have this whole counterfeit system, whether or not it's a hierarchy of the angels, as Psalms 82 talks about with the council of the gods, or this counterfeit ruling society that's very hierarchical and represents a similar sort of hierarchy on earth as what they have in the rebellious council of the gods, you are going to have that downstream down into the various different civilizations. And so even though the pantheon of gods might be united, the basic civilizations are rivals to be the dominant civilization for that particular sort of branch or division of polytheism. So they're going to have rivalries, and they're going to try and conquer the whole world. So as an example, in Critias and Timaeus, with as Plato wrote about Atlantis, you have all of these different antediluvian civilizations, and depending on who you're going to read, there's going to be 4, 7, 9, 11, 13. There's different numbers. The common sort of understanding is probably 7. Not that that has to be the right one, but that's sort of the consensus number. And so Poseidon, who is the offspring of Poseidon and Cleito, produces 11 other brothers, or 9 other brothers, and they're going to have a world kingdom, the most advanced civilization in the world, sort of the representative model of the golden age, but they want to control the whole world, and they want to be the center for the whole world, and they're going to have a war in the antediluvian world against all the other nations. And this is what happens after the flood as well. You have the same type of thing. There's this fight for a rivalry because they're all sort of Antichrist type figures. So you can look at the Nephilim culture as an Antichrist culture that's going to eventually show up at the time of Antichrist, when he becomes the king or the dictator of the whole world and the center of the religion. So you have a violent culture, you have human sacrifices, you have all sorts of sacrifices, you have this pursuit of knowledge at any cost. I'm not saying it was all bad. I'm saying a lot of it was bad. They had laws and they had rules, but it was not done in the same sort of spirit, and it was more for servitude. So they established a 4-class system, both before the flood and then after the flood. We know that as the feudal system. So the bottom 2 classes were the humans occupied, sort of a very small entrepreneurial class, class 3, and then the slave and servitude class underneath. And then the rest runs the sort of the oligarchical business side, they run the religious side, and they run the governance and the army side. So you've got, a religious class and a nobility class outside the religious class. And those are the 4. And if you look at what they're trying to do as they're trying to bring about this Antichrist system of the Nephilim and the Rephaim, is they're trying to crush the middle class as they've tried to bring about world government. it's going to be the same thing again, only it'll be kind of as what most people would maybe almost deceive themselves in a technological manner, which vastly underestimates the level of the technology that was provided to the antediluvian society by the fallen angels. So this knowledge that Enoch develops and puts into 7 different disciplines, the 7 sacred sciences, is going to merge with the illicit knowledge from heaven. And this is all things not to be taught to humankind for 2 reasons. One is because of the violence and the destruction that it will bring, and the other thing is we're not quite ready to handle this kind of information and this kind of knowledge. I'm not saying knowledge is bad. I'm just saying knowledge can be used for good and evil. And it's got a 2-sided sword. And I always kind of wonder whether or not Jesus' 2-sided sword is sort of a reflection of he's going to destroy that as the word of God and all of the knowledge. He's going to, he uses it for good, but he also uses it to take care of the spurious ones and all of the seed, as Psalms 21 talks about, that are the seed of the terrible ones on earth. So you have this knowledge that's being developed, and it is taking that society to a significant level, probably greater than what we have today, and I think we're just catching up, because we can't build the same type of megaliths and do the same things that they were doing. So when you hear about the gods providing knowledge to civilization, or in the book of Enoch where they're providing illicit knowledge, it is on a very broad scale and covering everything that merges with the initial 7 disciplines, but accelerates it to a level that pretty much produces a situation that brings about the first apocalypse by water.
Well, thank you, Gary. You know, Azazel, he taught breastplates, armor, and stuff like that. But did he teach enchantments as well?
He did. And there's more than one that's accredited with it. And you've got 7 fallen angels that are attributed teaching specific things, but Azazel's a little different. Azazel is said in the book of Enoch to be the one that virtually taught most of the knowledge to the antediluvians, people before the flood. And that included the art of war, not only introducing war that wasn't there before by implication, but the arts and the crafts to build the weapons and the strategies to go with it, and probably the military, the military tactics and the martial arts in terms of fighting that would go along with that. And that's kind of represented in the warrior class of the Nephilim, and in other societies like with the Tengu, which are more like raven or bird-like priests and warriors, and where the the martial arts like karate and kung fu would come from, right? So that was taught by the gods. So he taught so much knowledge and probably encouraged and enticed his other rebels to do so, but he was depicted as the scapegoat for destroying the antediluvian world, and all of the sins of the world were hung on him, as the book of Enoch talks about. And I think as represented by the scapegoat for all of the illicit knowledge, of the scapegoat that's sacrificed as the second goat on the Day of Atonement, that's in Leviticus 16, that we don't get a reason for. And that word scapegoat, that's in the King James Version Bible, goes back to the Hebrew word Azazel. And so the other angels were, they were part of the teaching of it, and they certainly, through their wives, as were commonly understood, taught a lot of this knowledge. But Azazel was teaching whatever they were teaching, as well as the ones that he specifically was attributed to. And he would be like the leader of the Watchers. So he would be one of the Satans, answerable to the Satan, Ha-Satan, as the book of Enoch talks about Satan's in plural and Satan's in singular form. And so he would be the one that would be sort of authorizing that to those other angels. And I find it interesting that there's 7 fallen angels and there's 7 wandering stars. I think they're sort of kind of representative of the same type of fallen angel that was leading the council of the gods before the flood. And then you have other gods stepping up after the flood that we would know biblically as the Baalim, for example, who are going to reign after the flood. And you have the same type of pantheon set up with Zeus on Olympus as an offspring god, Baal's the offspring of El. You have Osiris and Isis, you have Anki and Enlil. These are all offspring gods that are going to show up after the flood. They're going to set up the same hierarchy. And then I think they disappear into the abyss as well, into the abyss prison, into the bottomless pit prison for the same crimes that their parent gods did. And I think they're not really offspring gods. I think they're just, we're moving up in ranks to take over. And it's an allegory to sort of take it away that there's a host of rebellious angels and a host of loyal angels, and that's the Hebrew word Saba, which means army of angels. So you have a counterfeit army as well, and they have rank and hierarchy as well. And I think that's what happens. They just moved up to replace the parent gods that went to the abyss prison.
You know, Gary, do you think Lilith taught Cain any type of Enochian mysticism in the land of Nod?
Well, somebody certainly did.
Somebody had.
Somebody was helping him out. And well, and there's an interesting book. It's you don't know how accurate it is or is it legitimate, but it has sort of a consistency in message. And it's called The Book of the Lamech, son of Cain. And it talks about the city of Enoch, the city that Cain built for his first son, as being the city of the angels and the city of knowledge at that time. So Cain is going to inherit knowledge from Adam, and he's going to teach it to Enoch, and together they're going to develop that into Enochian mysticism. But then they get this knowledge that merges, that comes from the fallen angels. And a lot of it comes through the wives. So Lilith is either, a mother goddess that is a partner to one of the 7, or Lilith might be just another angel that's in the hierarchy, or she might be an offspring as in a demigod or a Nephilim. You get sort of different accounts. But I think that when you look at Lilith as sort of being part of from the original understanding of Lilith, which is older than the Kabbalah version, whom they actually bring back from Babylon after Nebuchadnezzar takes them into exile into Babylon, I think they learn about Lilith in the Sumerian tradition, because that's when the Lilith tradition starts to show up in Kabbalism, in terms of Lilith being a consort of Adam. And also in Kabbalism and other Gnostic sources is that Lilith, which is the daughter of Lilith, is going to become Cain's wife in that same sort of tradition. So that then would speak to some sort of relationship, if that's true. And I don't have scriptural evidence to say that that's the case. But what we do know is that this knowledge that Enoch and Cain were developing exploded once into technology that we're just catching up to this day, once it merged with the knowledge of the fallen angels. So you get the grouping of the fallen angels, you get this explosion of the knowledge, you get this bloodline that's going to intermarry to produce the Nephilim in the 6th generation. And I think there has to be a connection there in terms of the female, the physically female gods, or the goddesses, as they take a gender of a female form in the physical world, would have an association within that religion, because Cain wasn't worshiping the God of the universe anymore. And he was so upset. He never forgave God for punishing him. He held this
Yes.
grudge all of his life. And so he sought out, I think, the fallen angels, even though he was obviously communicating with them, whether it was Satan, Azazel, whichever angel that was producing the hate in him to rebel against God and to kill his brother. I think he formalizes that relationship after he leaves Eden and goes east to Nod, east of Eden, in Shinar, and that's where you're going to have Nimrod, who's going to inherit that knowledge after the flood. But that's a different rabbit hole. So it's a Sumerian tradition, right? It comes out of that Sumerian mythos. And so I think there might be something to that, because we certainly know that the lineage of Cain, right down through Lamech and Tubal Cain and Jubal and Jubal and Nama, were associating with the fallen angels. So one presumes, with all that circumstantial evidence, that, yeah, they were working together, and Lilith may have taught a lot of knowledge to either Cain, or people within Cain's lineage, like Enoch or some of the other descendants thereafter. And Lilith is sort of associated and kind of connected to being either a wife of or a consort of some of these gods or fallen angels that the book of Enoch talks about, because she is not only a queen of heaven, which would elevate her to a god as a demigod, thought to be, as I recall, the offspring of Absu. And I'm not convinced that Tiamat's involved, but Tiamat may also be involved on that. I'd have to double check my records on that. But she is also not only a queen of heaven, but very high up in the bloodlines of the Nephilim bloodlines in terms of the matriarchy. So you have Tiamat at the top and Lilith right below, and then Lilith, who's going to marry Cain, and they're going to create the dragon bloodline out of that in the antediluvian epoch. So I
hope y'all are getting this, because I definitely am. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Gary, because you're nailing it, Gary, right on the head. And I want the audience to please get this. Enochian mysticism. Azazel equals Cain. Cain equals the bad Enoch. The bad Enoch equals Nimrod, and etc.
Yeah, and Enochian mysticism is sun worship.
Yes.
And they move their calendar from the lunar calendar to the solar calendar, which we have today as well. And so if you understand then that Enochian mysticism isn't the religion of Abraham, it's the religion of fallen angels that the polytheists have embraced ever since its creation. And that's the that's the religion of the fallen angels that they passed down to the followers of the fallen angels, both before and after the flood. Then everything that they do it needs to be seen through that sun worshiping rebellious lens.
Yes, Gary. Nimrod, did he become a Nephilim, or did he become a Gibborim? Gary, can you straighten that out for us?
Yeah, it's a good question, because Nimrod is considered the first patriarch and founder of ancient masonry after the flood. So he inherits the knowledge according to the Gnostics and the secret societies. He writes the first constitution for them after the flood. And he uses this knowledge that Hermes finds that Enoch, son of Cain, hid under the pyramids, that they give him credit for supplying the technology to build. And it's buried in 36,525 books, stacked on top of each other in 9 vaults under the pyramids. And Hermes finds one of the pillars of Enoch or Lamech, depending on which version that you're talking about, and he takes that knowledge back to Nimrod. So Nimrod uses this, and he creates through that knowledge Babel City and Babel Tower, right? And it doesn't. We're not explained biblically where he gets this knowledge from, and one presumes it's not Noah. And he usurps the kingdom, and he imposes a religion that's rebellious to God, which is the Enochian mysticism reborn after the flood. That is the allegory for the Babylon religion in the end time, because Babylon is rooted in Babel, which is the religion of Nimrod, who is an archetypical Antichrist figure. So was Nimrod then a Nephilim, or was he just a Nephilim wannabe? That's the big question. Typically, a demigod is known in polytheism as the offspring of a god and a human female. And then sometimes in polytheism, it's the offspring of a female goddess and a male human. So after the flood, for example, the Gilgamesh that's talked about after the flood versus the one that's talked about in Enoch, Book of Giants, who is looking to Enoch to see whether or not they can avoid or avert the flood coming. This one is born from Nin or Nun-sun, which is a goddess in the Sumerian mythology, and the father is Lugabanda. And Lugabanda is a king of Uruk, and Gilgamesh is going to become king there. And so you have this understanding that there is a knowledge that is being passed on to Nimrod. Nimrod is going to act like a Nephilim, right? But he is not a demigod, right? Not like Gilgamesh after the flood, not like, let's say, Hercules before the flood, that's the son of Zeus and a human female. He is the son of Cush.
Yes.
Right? So he's got a human father. He doesn't have an angelic father. But what is so interesting is the word that is used, that he became a mighty one, which is the Hebrew word Gibbor, which is the singular for Gibborim, just as Nephilim is the plural of a Nephil and giants, and Rapha and Rephaim. And that's the word that's used to describe the Nephilim in Genesis 6:4. It's also a word used to describe a giant in the book of Job, the only time that Gibbor is actually specifically translated as a giant. And in the Ugaritic text, the Gibbor are thought to be a warrior class of giants as well. That doesn't mean that was a specific tribe of them. It's probably more of a title, as I understand the Ugaritic text. So he became Gibborim, which is kind of cryptic kind of language, right? So it's not that he was born, unless his mother might have been a goddess, but we're not told that either, and we're not provided that information. But then he would have been Rephaim, Nephilim, not Gibborim, right? So he became it. And that word became, just to finish up here, has to do with, as it's translated in English, as violating a covenant, breaking your word, breaking your bond. And I think what happens there is he's human, but with the knowledge that he's going to gain, he's going to start to change, whether or not there's knowledge that can change his DNA, whatever he's going to do. But the knowledge starts to make him like a Gibborim. And then he's going to, I think, stay and intermarry with the Rephaim after the flood and the Aryans that are all living there after they're dispersed from Babel. And he's going to start a bloodline within the post-Diluvian giants.
Yes, sir. And he definitely did. You know, the agenda of Nephilim culture, what would be their agenda?
Well, the spurious ones were created for one purpose: to try and deny for their godfathers, the fallen angels, the destiny of humankind, that we have the ability to choose our destiny, yes, to be raised up like angels in the future time. And that they were created right from their beginning to lead humankind away, to enslave humankind, and to take that destiny away. And that in the process, they would show to the Almighty God of the universe, the God of the Bible, that the angelic rebellion was justified, and that no matter what you do, people are going to rebel, angels are going to rebel, demigods are going to rebel. The thing that the fallen angels didn't know is they didn't know about the resurrection, and that God is Alpha Omega, and he knew the angels were going to rebel. He knew Satan was going to cause the fall of Adam and Eve. He knew that the fallen angels were going to create the giants. He knew the giants were going to be after the flood. He knew everything that was going to happen, and he lets things play out through free choice because he's greater than free choice. And he knows the end from the beginning as the Alpha Omega, as Jesus is also the Alpha Omega. And that all along, God was going to resolve the initial rebellion through the creation of the Adamites, who would be the resolution to the angelic rebellion. And that resolution was going to come about through introducing the Messiah, the Redeemer, and that the resurrection was going to permit our ability to become like gods, even though we have human fathers, as the New Testament talks about. And so we know the fallen angels didn't know about the resurrection because, as the book of Corinthians talks about, had they known, they wouldn't have had Jesus crucified. And what I think is so apropos in 1 Peter is that when Jesus is still in the grave, he's talking to these angelic spirits that are in the abyss for the violations against creation and the violations against humanity, that resurrected humans will judge those angels in the future time for those crimes. He is basically telling them, your rebellion's over, and that you can continue to do, or your followers can continue to do what they're doing until the ordained times, until all the names of the book of life are permitted to make their choice. But your rebellion's over, and you all are going to the lake of fire.
You know, the bottom line is they fear Yahweh.
Well, they do.
Some people say they have a conscience because they go to Enoch and say, please go to Yahweh and plead our case. But they automatically, they must fear him.
They do. They do. And so much so, they do not blaspheme God themselves. They use their human offspring, the demigods and the followers of humankind that follow in polytheism. They use those two groups of races to slander God. That's how fearful they are. Just as the demon spirits in Legion are so fearful Jesus is going to send them to the lake of fire before their time, they fear them as well. So they will use, and we will see this in the end time. We see it today, but particularly Antichrist will blaspheme God in unheard of ways. But you never get scripture talking about angels that are talking about God in that way. It's because they fear the instant punishment that God could and maybe would do, because that fear seems to be sort of front and center.
Yes, Gary. You know, Gary, we've got a question from Genghis Khan. I don't think you're able to read it, so I'm going to read it out to you, Gary. It says, does the prefix Gibbor, can you read that, Gary?
Yeah, I can read it. It says, does the prefix Gibbor, pronounced with a soft G, perhaps have any relation to the Arabic Semitic Jabal for a mountain? So yeah, I'm trying to remember the syntax of the word. There was two pronunciations to the word G, and the soft pronunciation was replaced with a sort of an apostrophe type of thing in the time of Tiberius. And so you would have an example of that with Gomorrah, even though it's pronounced Gomorrah today with the LF apostrophe, it should be Amora. And you'll actually see that spelling, I think, once in the King James Version Bible, and certainly as you take that back to Hebrew. So typically, that is when you have that soft G, it's when there's, as I remember, an I and an E following it, as opposed to an A and an O, which would keep and the I that would keep the G hard. So my gut feeling is no, and it wouldn't be pronounced as ya. It would be more of a so if I did that properly, because I'm not very fluent in linguistic Hebrew. I do study the Hebrew words and things like that, so I'm not convinced that there's a connection there for mountain.
Well,
Having said that, I mean, mountain is absolutely associated with giants, right? So with Mount Hermon.
Yes, and Mount Hermon. You know, what is the UN base doing on the top of Mount Hermon, Gary? It's a good question, huh?
Well, it is, you know, at the 33rd degree and some change. And it's the largest UN base in the world. And I think they're there because not only is it a strategic location, I think they're there exploring things that took place where the Council of the Gods was located, that where the oath to create the giants was taken. And I think they're doing that all in preparation for the end time.
All right. You know, it's kind of like Genghis wanted to say that was he thanks you for answering his question. Genghis Khan just said that. He said, thanks you, Gary. You know, Gary, I know this has nothing to do if you're a flat earther or not. You know, it doesn't matter to me. But what is the UN doing with the flat earth map as its logo? I mean, it just confuses everybody. Yep. It makes everybody want to fight and bicker, all that stuff.
It's interesting that they do that, but it does seem consistent with their ancient religion. Okay. So if you look at, you know, Kabbalism and other religions as they depicted the world, you had that dome with sort of a half an earth and then the underworld that's sort of underneath. That was a common thing before the modern times with the polytheism, which then they seemingly went to the globe model, even though it's not part of their religion. And now you got Christians that are taking up the flat earth model. So
yes.
So I think what it does is it reflects a lot of their ancient beliefs, because they tend to, in polytheism, plaster, advertise, cover all of their organizations and their literature and everything they do with taciturn imagery that reflects their history, their religion, and their genealogies. And so I would think that was selected to make that prevalent all over the earth and to use that for down the road. I don't know whether or not we have a flat earth or a full globe. I think we have a full globe no matter what. Whether or not half the earth is sort of the underworld, as the polytheist models would suggest, I don't know. What I do know is something goes around something. And what I do know is they're playing a long chess game where the end game is to bring the greatest delusions ever seen over humankind so that they can bring about Antichrist and complete rebellion on the earth. So I have a red flag on anything that I know comes out of polytheism, being a Christian, that I make sure I'm very, very careful with, even though I could probably make a case for flat earth biblically. I'd also make a case for a round earth biblically. So I'm agnostic, but I remain, I lean a little bit towards more of a globe. Whether or not there's a dome on top of that, that's a whole different ballgame, and that something goes around something. But you have to know that that map has something to do with the world as they see it and how it's going to be split up down the road and how it's going to be used in the universal religion.
All right, Gary. Genghis Khan just
Yeah, I would say it's flat based on a top-down view.
yes.
Right. So you would see that base from that type of view.
And then the firmament would be above us.
Well, the firmament, yeah, there's three heavens as we understand it biblically. One is where God dwells, and the angels when they're in their spirit form, and then there's the firmament, which is the first heaven, and that is from the separation of the waters that is inclusive of the sun. So however far the sun is away, everything inside the sun is part of the firmament. And then what's outside the firmament, which would be the rest of the universe, is the second heaven.
Yes, because nobody, we're all searching for answers. Nobody knows, if it's flat, it's spear. We definitely know we've been lied to. We definitely know that. And we need to, seek to find the truth, and Yahweh is going to reveal it to us. Gary, I told you I'd only keep you an hour, so we only got 20 more minutes, and I'd like to ask you just a couple more questions.
Sure.
I know I've asked you before. We talked about this before, but I don't think some of the audience is new to some of the audience because you haven't talked about this on a lot of other shows. Ginobili means what, Gary? Ginobili?
Oh, that's if I understand what you're talking about, it's a reference in the book that I have, and it's a reference back to Gnosis and the wisdom of the world and the nobility class that is educated, and it has all sorts of imagery like that. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay.
Yes. My friends, if y'all don't have Gary Wayne's book, you need to go out and get Gary Wayne's book because it's going to change your life. It changed my life. It taught me about Nephilim culture. My friends, I didn't even know what a Nephilim was until I got my hands on Gary Wayne's book. And my friends, I'm coming from the heart. It's going to change your life. So please go out and get Gary Wayne's book. Gary, I think I got a link right here I can pop up right here. And that way, it should be under sales. Oh no, I got my shirt. But Gary, could you give people your email address and everything where they could go directly to get your book, signed copy or not?
Sure. The best way to get a hold of me or to buy my book is through my website, which is the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the Genesis 6, the number 6 conspiracy.com. And on the website, you'll get a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters. So you'll get a good feel for whether or not that's the book for you or not. But I think you'll find the table of contents is rather interesting in itself. And on the website, you can hit contact the author on that icon and send me an email if you would like a little more information on stuff or ask me a question. It may take me a while to get back to you, but I will get back to you. Also on the website, you can click over to the Buy Now page and you can get a signed copy of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Or you can link over from that same buy page to barnesandnoble.com, to amazon.com, amazon.ca, and over to the Kindle version. And if you are wanting a signed copy from me, then it doesn't matter whether you're in Canada. I have a page for that. I have a page for the US. I also have a page for overseas. So that's the best way to get a hold of me and or purchase my book. But the book will also be available on most online bookstores.
Yes, it was easy. It's easy
Yeah.
to find Gary's book.
Easy to find. And if it's not
Yes.
stocked by your local bookstore and you want to support them, it's distributed by Bookmasters out of Pennsylvania, so they can order it in. And my sequel is going to be marketed off of the same website. And it's going to be, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. But this one is specifically targeted at Christians, and for Christians who want to go deeper into how much information there is on giants, because there's more than I put in the book, and there's more information on the fallen angels, on angels in particular, and I'll link the fallen angels in there. And there's a connection between prehistory and prophecy that I'll spend a lot of time in the book connecting, because it's one of my contentions is that to understand end time prophecy, you have to understand a lot of the allegory through the context and imagery of prehistory. Just as I made a reference from Babylon to Babel to Enochian mysticism, you don't get the full context unless you understand what happened in prehistory and understand that the Adamites are the resolution to the angelic rebellion. And that sort of starts to explain why everything that happens. And so the subtitle is going to be something like prehistory and prophecy, but I'll string it out into a sentence. And I've written the 83 chapters. I've written it so it's not going to be redundant of the first book, but I have to use a little bit of information from the first book, not to sort of jump halfway into some things and people might get lost. But it'll dovetail very well with everything that's written in the first book and not being redundant. So this is a ton of new information. And I'll detail a little bit of information in there about what I was talking about with the hard G and the soft G, as just what sort of a tidbit of some of the stuff that's going to be in there.
All right. So Genghis Khan, go out. If you don't got Gary Wayne's book, Genghis Khan, you need to go out and get Gary Wayne's book. Gary, we got about 10 minutes left. Gary, tonight we just do a little recap, and we was talking about Enochian mysticism and the root of it, right? And would you agree with this? Azazel equals Cain. Cain equals the bad Enoch. The bad Enoch equals Nimrod. And this is, how did Nimrod become a Nephilim? He had to get his hands on this on these books and stuff, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting, there's a direct connection, not only the worship, but something changes, I think, in all of them to take on more of that demigod type of physical status, and particularly with the additional information. And again, what I write about in the first book is that in a lot of polytheist accountings of the lineage of Cain, is they're all giants, right?
Yes.
And so whether or not they've sort of elevated themselves through the knowledge somehow, both mentally and physically, I don't particularly believe that they were giants. I think they became like giants, and I think that knowledge had a lot to do with that. So we need to kind of keep that in mind, and that we also need to remember that it's that religion that is that one of those things that continues throughout the characters that you mentioned, and that Enochian mysticism is the basis of all of the polytheist religions that we have today, and that this knowledge that was provided not only may have been used to help physically with Nimrod, but also in what he was trying to do at Babel. And Babel, through the Hebrew definition of confusion of languages. But as we talked about, and the Tower of Babel is a story that's talked about in Sumerian legends with the Tower of Eridu and Enmer-Akar. There's an Armenian account, there's a Akkadian account, there's a Kisha-Maya account, an Aztec account. There's lots of accounts to it. But it's the Akkadian one whom Nimrod is the bloodline sort of patriarch to the Akkadians that strikes me with Babalu or Babel. E-L-I-L-U, transliteration of the same word, just as A-L and Baal is the same suffix. That means a god or an angel in Hebrew, and it also means a god in polytheism. And Bab is a gateway. So you get these legends in polytheism where Nimrod is threatening to climb the ziggurat, the Tower of Babel, and to threaten God and to say, if you ever bring on the flood again, I'm going to climb the ziggurat and I'm going to kill you. I'm going to stop you from doing that, which really sounds rather bizarre. And that how could a ziggurat reach into heaven? It can't be, stone structure just can't be built that high. But Bab, as it's understood in Akkadian, means a gateway or a portal. And we talked about the three different heavens, and one being a spiritual location, and also you could look at the underworld as also having occupation in the earth, but in another dimension. So he may have been trying to do one of two things or both. One, he may have wanted to get his gods he was now worshiping out of the abyss prison in the underworld. And then with the threats to God, he may have been wanting to storm heaven to try and kill God, just as Antichrist will in Daniel 8 and 8 through 10 does, and will do in the end time with the help of Satan and the fallen angels. So this technology was significant.
Yes, it was. You know, we got another question. Can you read that on the screen, Gary, for us?
Says, I wonder what the connection between Enochian mysticism and Jewish mysticism might be. Well, for people who haven't researched the Essenes, this will come as a bit of a shocker to the standard dogma as who the Essenes were. And I have a great document on the Essenes, and I cover them. So get a hold of me through the website if you want that. And I also cover them extensively in the first book. The Essenes were the first monastic order that was in the West. And it's based on the monastic orders of Hinduism and Buddhism and places like that. And they're the role model and the basis for the Gnostic orders that mold into Catholicism, like with the Jesuits, like with the Augustinians, as with the Cistercians, and on with all the different monastic orders that are molded within Catholicism. And that this was a third pillar or third circle of Judean religion, along with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And that the Essenes believed that they were the original religion of Heliopolis that Moses brought back, and the monotheist version went rogue at somewhere around the time of the establishment of the monarchy with Saul and David. And that they worshipped angels who they received their knowledge from, and that they wouldn't give these angels names up even upon death. And these were the fallen angels. And the book that they relished the most was the book of Jubilees, which is a book about Enoch, and details about his Enochian sun-worshipping religion and all of the things that are part of our modern calendar and understanding today, and in terms of how the world and the universe is presented in the calendar that we use today. And so you have this direct link right from the beginning of the creation of Israel with Jewish mysticism. Kabbalism comes along as a secondary version of mysticism. You've got several mystical groups in the time of Jesus, whether it's the Joanites and Sabaeans and a whole bunch of other different groups. But Kabbalism comes along as the Eastern intermixing of mysticism amongst Judaism that becomes the more dominant mystical religion of the diaspora of Judeans after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So there's a direct connection there to Enochian mysticism and through the Essenes. And Kabbalism is a little bit later comer, but it is the same religion, just has that different vernacular, cultural lens and slant to it.
All right, Gary. Gary, one more time. Your new book is called what? What's the name of your new book? Because I don't think a lot of people can catch that.
Yeah, it's the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. And here's what I was toying around with in the last few days in terms of what that subtitle might be. So where I have in the first one, it's how secret societies and the descendants of giants plan to enslave humankind. I'm toying around with something like how comprehending Nephilim and Rephaim giants of prehistory helps decode our hidden history and end time prophecy. I'll probably try and shorten it from that, but it's going to have prehistory, prophecy, and giants that are in it.
Well, y'all heard it on this channel first, right? Yeah, Gary Wayne was brainstorming his titles for us. All right, Mr. Wayne. Yeah, I please close us in prayer, please.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay.
Father in heaven, we thank you for blessing us to be able to get together and exchange information and to celebrate your world, your guidance, worship you as our God, appreciate, worship, praise our Redeemer, and hopefully be able to take the things that we are discussing and doing in these types of meetings so that we can communicate that as clearly as possible to other people who have not heard some of the things that we're talking about, because we want to prepare everybody for what is surely coming if indeed we're in the fig tree generation, and I think that we are. Because if people are going in unprepared, because churches are not teaching, and we pray that you help ministers dig into prehistory and dig into prophecy to help their flocks and prepare them for what is coming, because what is coming is going to deceive even the elect for that where possible, and you've told us that it is possible. So we thank you for permitting these types of get-togethers and for communicating information. And we pray these things to you in the name of our Redeemer, the Word Jesus, who sits at your right-hand side and testifies to you for all of us and for all of the saints that are out there. And we also pray in the name of the Holy Spirit in your great and holy name. Amen.
Amen, brothers and sisters. Thank you for such a wonderful prayer, Gary Wayne. You know, Gary Wayne, I have one more question to ask you, Gary. You said it, we are in the fig tree generation, right? And how much longer do we got till we see something that's
well, biblical? I think we're in the beginning of sorrows of the birth of the fig tree generation, and we're seeing things like wars and rumors of wars. And I think we're seeing some of the shuffling in terms of the 10 empires coming along. And Russia is trying to get their empire, and China is trying to get their empire. And we see those groups of nations starting to form in spheres of influence, trading blocks, groups of nations or empires, just as the Club of Rome divided the world into 10 groups of nations. So does the Bible talk about those 10 empires in Daniel 2.
And the UN is separated into 10, right?
Exactly. So it may not be exactly like that, but that's the direction that they want to do. And that we see earthquakes increasing. We see pestilence starting to become on the stage, and expect that to increase and famine to follow. So that's the birth pang stage, and that we're going to need to see this move in a way that the catastrophes will move us more towards a global positioning, and that it will also enable the rise of the universal religion. And it's going to be the universal religion that comes first that will utilize an individual who will become Antichrist to negotiate that 7-year covenant. So we're somewhere in the countdown, I think, and I would look at the fig tree generation probably starting in 1967.
Yes.
With the taking of Jerusalem, because in end time prophecy, the southern kingdom, or Judah, who was dispersed by the Romans, needs to be back in the land. Whether or not they're all descendants of Judah or not, there's certainly a remnant there that God is going to fight for in the end time. But they need to be there because end time prophecy centers around that and Jerusalem being there, so, and being occupied by the southern kingdom. So how long is a generation? Well, book of Exodus says 40 years. That's more of a reign of a king. We've got 70 years in the book of Psalms. In Genesis 6:3, God at the time of the creation of the giants limits life to 120 years. So probably 70 or 120 years is probably the length of a generation, but it doesn't have to go the whole generation. And
Yes.
so I think we can see the birth pangs getting stronger. I think they're going to continue to get stronger. I think there's still a lot of things that have to happen yet. I mean, those are two big stumbling blocks. And along with that, and why the universal religion is so important is that in the first 3.5 years of the Daniel 9:27 7-year covenant, in the middle of it, the sacrifice stops. That implies that at the beginning of it, as the sacrifice on a wing or an extremity of the temple, or an overspreading of the temple, depending on which translation that you're reading, needs to start. And you're going to need that universal religion as part of that covenant to permit that sacrifice of the Jewish people to begin again. And without a universal religion, I just can't imagine how the Muslims would permit that to happen.
Yes, Gary. Thank you. Thank you so much for ending us with that, because I get asked that question a lot. You know, where do you think we're at in the fig tree generation? And like you're saying, it's really hard to know if it's 70 years, 120 years, but we're definitely in the fig tree generation. And I definitely
and I would also say we're not at the point of any seals being opened, any trumpets being blown, or any bowl wraths being poured out. The seals tend to start to open up either just before or at the start of the last 7 years.
Okay. All right, Mr. Wayne. All right, Gary. All right, audience. I want to thank y'all so much for tuning in. My name is Bishop Holsonback. We had Gary Wayne on tonight. Please go out and get Gary's book. It's going to change your life, my friends. It did mine. And it's going to teach you about Nephilim culture and how they have planned to enslave mankind. That's Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Wayne. Thank you.